So I'm making this recording to show what's going to be happening with Mars and Mercury here. Mercury's about to go retrograde. Making this video here on May 6th. So, as we see, within a couple weeks, Mercury will be retrograde. He's going retrograde on the 18th. By the 19th, he'll be retrograde. You see he's going to go retrograde back over Mars. You see, a week later, he will have passed Mars. You see here, Mars is 11, 18, Mercury is 19, and then he'll pass Mars retrograde on the 27th. So Mercury and Mars are going to hang out again very close to each other for a while. And then fast forward, say 30 days later to, you see now Mercury and Mars will be joined again in Gemini. Then they'll pass each other again in the middle of July. See here, July 14th, Mercury and Mars are right on top of each other, so they'll connect again. And then a week later, Mercury will pass Mars again. So the bottom line is that between now, which is like early May, and the middle of July, Mercury and Mars are still going to be hanging out with each other. So get used to that Mercury-Mars mashup extravaganza. You know, Mercury-Mars together, or associating with each other, are somewhat at odds, you know. Mercury, of course, is the words we use. It's our capacity to be flexible and have discrimination and be non-judgmental and be, again, you know, curious about maybe what someone else is thinking and what someone else, you know, maybe intended with their speech or with their, you know, with their communication in some way or another. And Mars is very simplistic, logical, black and white. Well, you know, I have to defend my principles or my sense of right and wrong. And so Mars can really interrupt Mercury speech and Mercury communication and Mercury flexibility. And so this is one of the biggest problematic conjunctions that I see. When I see Mercury-Mars, they really tend to interrupt each other because they also feel similar to each other. It's kind of like Venus-Jupiter. They kind of have a similar feeling, a similar nature, because Mars likes activity and action, and Mercury is intellectual activity. A lot of people get these things mixed up. Like a lot of people say Mercury is logic. Mercury is logical. Mercury is actually not logical because logical is black and white. Mars is logical. Logical is black and white, which, like logic and opinions, these are related to Mars, not to Mercury. Mercury is intelligence, discrimination, flexibility. Again, you can even see how those things are very similar, but the logic of Mars gets us into arguments. The most logical thing that we can do, much of the time, would lead us to arguments, because life is not logical. Like, you said this, but you did this, so it should be this way because you said it. Now it's not. That's an argument. That's logical. Like, for instance, math is very logical. You know, a computer works on very logical things. If this happens, then that happens. And if this, then that. It's on or off. Binary code. Binary. Yes or no. Right or wrong. Good or bad. That's Mars. Yes or no. You said this, you did that. So that's very simplistic nature of the mind, which says either you're right or I'm right. We can't both be right. It's either right or wrong, right? That's Mars. Mercury says anything could be right. It's all a matter of reference. It's all a matter of perspective. So logic is not really intelligence. Logic is to compel us to action. This is why Mars is the planet of action. And here's what I mean by that. And this is also the distinction I make between or with Mars and discipline. Because our actions are very simple. They're very black and white. We're only doing one thing at a time. And that logical, rational, black and white nature of Mars is to get us to do the right thing. For us to do the right thing. For us to do the right thing. That's what Mars is supposed to be doing. It's a Tamasic planet, and Tamasic planets we're supposed to keep to ourselves. We're supposed to do the right thing, not impose what the right thing is on somebody else. With other people, we're supposed to be tolerant and be able to see that what they did was right for them. But what we typically wind up doing is saying what's right for me should be right for you also. And if it's right for me and it's not right for you, then you're wrong. Or something like that. This is where we get into trouble with Mars. And I'm being on the more negative side because there are times we actually obviously need to do that. We need to distinguish between right and wrong and do it and put it into practice. Put it into practice. That's the important thing with Mars. Not argue about it, not fight about it, not inflict it on others, but be a standard that we live up to. That's what the logical, rational, fiery, black and white nature of Mars is for. It's for putting into practice what we know is right. Mercury is holding paradox. Because logic is the counterfeit version of intelligence. Righteousness and judgment is the counterfeit version of intelligence. We seem very smart when we're defending our principles and our logical conclusions about what we're certain is right. We seem so smart and we feel so smart, and actually we look very stupid, right? Because true intelligence, shown by Mercury, is the capacity to hold paradox. Like, for instance, you're both separate and a part of the whole. You're both small and enormous. There's your point of view, which is totally valid, and there's the point of view of every other being that's also totally valid. So when we this is Mercury, this isn't Mars. Because we don't get a lot done from that point of view, but we certainly get along with each other really well from that point of view, and we certainly will learn to understand things from that point of view, which is the nature of Mercury. Mercury's nature is not to get something done. That's Mars's nature, to get it done, to put it into practice. But while we're getting something done, Mercury is great to have, because Mercury, as we said, doesn't have a lot of preconceptions about the way it's supposed to be. So Mercury, with that detailed focus, can actually improve it and say, well, maybe we could do it this way too, and be curious and open and flexible. So there are different faculties of the mind. So in addition to Mercury turning retrograde, which I'll talk about in a second as well, he's going to be hanging out with Mars for a while. Now, he was just hanging out with Mars in Aries. As you can see, I just went back. This is like April 15th. You see Mercury and Mars are very close. That's April 15th, and then you see a week later, April 20th, Mercury and Mars are right on top of each other. So you can just see, if I go week by week, April 20th, or this is actually April 22nd. April 22nd. Now this is April 29th. You see Mercury has now gone into Taurus. And now if you see, this is this is May 7th. Mars and Mercury joined. May 14th, Mercury has started to slow down. By May 21st, Mercury's retrograde, getting very close to Mars. By the next week, Mercury is in lower degree. This is May 28th. And as I said, this will continue as Mercury will go direct. He turns direct on June 12th. So Mercury goes retrograde, I believe it was May 18th. And until June 12th. Yeah, so May 19th to June 12th, Mercury is retrograde in Taurus. May 19 to June 12th, Mercury goes retrograde in Taurus. He's going to pass over Mars in the process. So when Mercury's retrograde, it's time for us to reflect upon all these details. One of the main things with Mercury retrograde is it's a time for us to listen, because good communication is not just speaking, it's listening. And in fact, one of the most important parts of it is listening. Because it's listening that allows us to know what we're supposed to be adjusting to, know what we're supposed to be adapting to. So the retrograde quality of any planet, the retrograde motion of the planet, tends to bring it into an introspective way, or into an introspective posture, and winds up being more related to the reflective quality of that energy. So this reflection of, or this reflection on the details will be very important. Finding our inner voice, working through judgment and criticism of others. It's a big lesson for the next few months. It really started even a couple months ago in early March, when we had the eclipse and all those planets joined Ketu, and then all those planets went through Aries. Now Mars continues, and it's going to continue hanging out with Mercury, as we see through July, through the middle of July. Mercury's going to hang out with Mars again. So we will have had Mercury and Mars interacting in Pisces, Aries, Taurus, and Gemini. Pretty crazy. And so this retrograde cycle for May 18th to June 12th, May 19th to June 12th in Taurus, and going over Mars, is going to be a good time for us to ponder the things I was just talking about, this counterfeit intelligence, which is really kind of just faulty logic and strong opinions. Opinions come from Mars. And again, opinions are fine if they compel us to action to strengthen ourselves. Our opinions become a problem when we inflict them on others. These strong opinions of, it should be this way, it shouldn't be that way. That's good to compel us to do the right thing. That's all it's good for. I should be getting up early and doing meditation, and I should be eating the right food I need to eat, and I should be managing and being responsible for my own anger. I should be less critical of others. That's what I should be doing, right? This is what we all should be doing. Not, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. That's when Mars is a problem, and Mercury opens us up to that. Now, Mercury also interferes with Mars, because Mars is where we want to get something done, and Mercury wants to keep gathering more information. So there's also been a kind of interruption with Mars, which wants to, get things done as quickly as possible based on what we know is right and what we want to accomplish. But Mercury is still, if not having fun, quote, just still enjoying gathering more information and trying this too and trying that too. And in the meantime, we're not focused on accomplishing the goal, accomplishing the task. We're sort of starting the task, and then we say, well, but I could do this too. Like with me, maybe I'll start to do a project, and then I get derailed by spending a lot of time, like designing a website or doing things that aren't necessarily crucial to getting the thing finished, but something that I enjoy. This is how Mercury interrupts Mars, and it creates impatience and restlessness. So you want to really watch that sort of cutting speech that's both external and internal. And don't just say, well, I know we need to forgive ourselves too. This is one of the first things people go to when I say one of the main things with Mercury and Mars is working on forgiveness of others and forgiveness of the mistakes and being more intelligent about it. And so many times people online will say, and that includes forgive ourselves. You know what? Yeah, but I think we're a little too quick to forgive ourselves many times. We forgive ourselves really quickly and blame others. That is my feeling, especially about things as it's related to Mars, because it has to do with our short temper and our aggravation and our strong opinions that we wind up learning from. So it's time to, like, now will be a good time between now really and through July. We'll actually revisit this in the middle of July, but especially in the next month or so through the middle of June and a little bit beyond, as Mercury is going retrograde over Mars, middle of May to the middle of June. It's a good time to really ponder how your strong opinions and your judgments are sort of masquerading as intelligence, and really look at and ponder true intelligence and that true voice of tolerance and beauty in your head, because Mercury is really that voice in your head as well. And that voice in your head might be a little aggravated right now because it's been interacting with Mars for so long and will continue for a while. So they're in Taurus, which is a peaceful sign. It's more peace-loving. It's more about wanting to gather and hold things together, including connections. Especially when Mars and Mercury were in Aries, it could have definitely blown some things apart. When Mars went through Pisces and hit K2 during that whole eclipse thing, again, could have been very much about destroying things and letting things go, confusion. So Mercury was debilitated in Pisces, joined K2, then it goes into Aries, where it's really dominated by Mars. So at least now it's in Taurus, which is more stable, and Mars is not so fiery. There's not so much fiery, destructive influence on our discrimination, which, again, our discrimination is very subtle. The intellect, the buddhi, which is what Mercury rules, is very subtle. It requires detachment. It requires equanimity. It requires flexibility, not strong opinions, not strong identity. Like, Mars is very much about defending the ego. There's a lot of righteousness, and Mercury is actually has a kind of lack of those things. It's really not about that. It's actually about, I could be anything, you could be anything, it could be anything. It's very open. And that's the best part of the buddhi. It's that function of the mind that is open. The intellect, the buddhi. It's very easy to disturb the buddhi with any other kind of influence. This is why it's said in the text that Mercury is a benefic or a malefic based on association, based on what it's associating with. Because it's adaptable. Similar to the moon, but not emotional. And Mercury, the buddhi, adapts to the situation and is very easily influenced by the situation. And by the way, Mercury never becomes malefic. It's just that if he's with a malefic planet, he's going to facilitate and be helpful toward that goal, because that's what Mercury does. Mercury increases our intelligence about something. So it'll increase our intelligence about Mars. So now is the time to increase our intelligence about Mars. But the way we increase the intelligence is by having some detachment from it. That's what the neutrality is of Mars. Is of Mercury. So the neutrality of Mercury is very important in bringing discrimination. So ponder these things. They're very important, because then after Mercury and Mars dance around in Taurus, then they're going to dance around in Gemini, where Mars is actually also somewhat in detriment, and Mercury is very strong. So then we can really get that power of Mars to energize the buddhi, energize the intellect with a lot of discrimination. Interestingly, in particular, when you get Mercury and Mars together in Mercury's sign, it can bring a lot of jnana, which means the capacity to really see through illusion, because Mars gives like a sword or like a spear. Mars is related to Subramanya, the son of Shiva, who carries the spear. So Mars has that, like I said, the very simplistic nature, which is like a spear to penetrate through all of the thoughts. It can pierce through the veil of thinking. So Mercury and Mars together in the highest form can really pierce through the illusion of intelligence, the illusion of the intellect. So it's a kind of tricky thing. These things are also possible. So it's possible to have a lot of insight when Mercury and Mars are together as well, especially related to high levels of discrimination. So ponder this, important changes for the next couple months. So as you see here, May 19th, Mercury, Mars, pretty close. As you see, a week later, they're right on top of each other. Then if I go like a month later, you see Mars has already gone into Gemini. And then a couple weeks after that, Mercury joins again. This is on July 16th, Mars is 20 degrees, Mercury's 21 degrees. So they're right on top of each other. So keep that mind cool and light as much as possible. Keep the little smile on your face, which is the Mercury smile.